just to get started, talk about sort of the genesis of this and how, if at all, you guys had to come up with ideas that complemented one another, because they do all feel of a piece.
It came from actually being in Austin in 2006 at Fantastic Fest, where me, Sean, and Andrew all had films. So we were both here, and Andrew wasn't. But we in the end, we kind of, I guess, got together back in England and started going out, and it was Sean and our exec producer's idea. And yeah, they came to, I think, me and Andrew and said, "Do you fancy doing an anthology?" And I guess me and Andrew were both like, "Yeah, okay." And I really went from there, and we went away and wrote our own scripts, and then came back, and it just happened that they had a kind of communal link, really, a thematic kind of darkness to them. So yeah, that's right, and that I guess we wrote them sometime in early 2007.
And was there ever any specific thought that these would all sort of have like a sort of sexual undercurrent?
None whatsoever.
No, it was never deliberate. We just, the initial impetus behind it was, let's just operate under as complete freedom at this moment in time. Let's just see what we come up with, and then we can kind of figure out the rest of it as we go along. And so it's like, okay, go away for a couple of weeks, come back, pitch each other our stories, and then and literally we came back to the table, and this is what we had. And it was like, shit, that's the film. It's sex and horror. This is clearly, for whatever reason, the way our minds are working right at this moment in time. So that part of it was very, very simple. It's just they immediately clicked, and never really changed. Essentially, obviously, we went through a few drafts and gave each other notes, but essentially, the core stories were there and worked together pretty well. So.
Well, in terms of giving each other notes or feedback, and in terms of putting these three things together, what I think is really interesting about them is that they all kind of have a similar structure, that there is a build to a certain point and then there's kind of a turn. Was that something that at any conscious level, when you guys were going through that sort of collaborative process, that you felt like would work especially well together?
They think so. I think, again, we're very free in with letting everyone do whatever it is they wanted to do, and I think just by nature of telling a story, that's whether it's a feature film or that you're always working towards one essentially climactic point, and then you have things which then calm down, and I guess in short films quite often it's a twist rather than necessarily a dramatic climax per se. So I guess these being this kind of hybrid film of not quite short and not quite a feature, I guess I guess somehow we all felt that it worked.
I think it just seems to be a very natural structure for this kind of length of story, as you just build towards something and then take a turn somewhere. It all happened very organically. Because there was really no official development process or anything with this film. It's like, we were each other's sounding boards, and that was really all we had, and we gave each other notes, and then we ended up with a finished script which we took out there, and basically people went with it. They responded to the material, and there was never any kind of distributor notes or executive notes or anything like that on the script. It was like, we put it together ourselves and went with it, and that was what we made.
How much, once you were sort of, whether it's individually or in the process of giving each other notes, did you sort of flesh out whether it was a pathology, whether it was a sort of psychological profile of what these individuals' appetites were, to, I don't know, give it either an authenticity or at least a sort of coherence for each story? Did you guys think about that at all?
Again, not really. I mean, I think we all did different amounts of drafts, and I guess again that's something that comes out, and as you write, you kind of, I always think writing is like you have a big net with lots of holes in it, and bit by bit you fix up the holes, and the net becomes smaller and with the holes, and then in the end there's no holes theoretically. And I think it's just the more we write, the more things kind of really progress in terms of that kind of characterization and stuff. So yeah, I think it was a fairly organic kind of process.
I think part of my looking back at it now, and you kind of like maybe realise why you did things when you look back on them. But part of the reason I think I went to these two guys was that although our three styles are very different, what I saw in all of us is the fact that we were kind of making genre movies, but that are very grounded in kind of characterizations and this kind of psychological, whatever the rest of the subject matter is, there's always that attention to those kind of character psychologies in all the stuff we do. And so that was one of the reasons I think I responded to the films I'd seen from the other two guys and thought that we'd work well together. And so there would always be that, whatever other subject matter was in the story, I knew it'd have that kind of underpinning, that we were all essentially, I think, coming from a similar place in terms of how we viewed dealing with this kind of subject matter in this kind of genre.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I saw Red, White, and Blue last year and really loved it. And I'm really fascinated by the sort of emotional architecture of the movies that you come up with, because there is clearly a relationship, and then on top of that, or underneath that relationship, there are these sort of individual things. And how, I guess, is it just that process of refinement that gives you that sort of cohesion, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, again, writing is such a funny thing. I think you have an idea, you sit down, you spend 4 weeks writing, or 4 days, or whatever, and I guess as a writer director, you when you have it on the paper the first time, in its full length, then it's like, okay, this is, you can almost take a step back and read it more objectively and go, okay, this is what it's about, and it really goes from there. And I think certainly with again, with most scripts that I've done, I generally have this kind of point where I optimum write between 5 and 7 drafts, and usually, even though I'm quite often happy with the first draft, I kind of know now that I will write other drafts, whether it's with my own notes or external notes, and I think usually anything more than about 7 drafts, which I have done on some scripts, usually means that my kind of idea of what I was doing in the first place was kind of confused or not very clear. But yeah, it's certainly trying to get characters who again are neither black nor white but grey, and who do kind of bad things but aren't necessarily bad people. I mean, certainly in my last few films, that's something that's been fascinated me and something that I've tried to explore. And then Bitch is of course no different from that. With the guy, he kind of knows what he's doing is. He's got to know what he's doing is wrong, but something about him, he just wants that revenge for whatever reason, and so that he can, whether it's to move on with his own life or whether he thinks that she really deserves it, I don't know, but it's.
Mm-hmm. And for your film, I think there's a really interesting sort of class commentary in addition to sort of the template of this sort of sexual fetishism. Why in particular was that something that either interested you or preoccupied you? Was it just an interesting extra element, or was that something in particular that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have this kind of slight class warrior chip on my shoulder sometimes, but I think there's also a real tradition of that in UK filmmaking. I think it's a much bigger issue in the UK than it is, say, in the US, and it just kind of seemed to fit naturally with the story, and I was kind of. It's only just come up in conversation with a previous interview we've just done, but someone mentioned Deathline, which is like one of my favourite UK horror movies, and there's a real sort of class issue at the core of that as well. And I guess, the idea of there being this underclass that are kind of being suppressed by these well-to-do people, but the underclass rising up and devouring them, and I don't know, it all seems to fall into place very naturally, and I sort of respond to that kind of thing, and there's always that element there in like the early Romero Dead movies as well, which were seminal for me as a kid. So I think you accumulate all these influences when you're young, and then they come spilling out of you in strange ways sometimes. And I think that was just kind of what happened with this.
Mm-hmm.